Hi everyone, this is Laura Sequeiros here, and this is the book that I chose, Language and Power by Norman Fairclough. A few things before I start answering the questions. Just the concepts in this book, because everything in this book has me stop and thinking and reflecting and wanting to learn more or reaffirm what I have learned. Because in this course, every word counts, and many things around the language count. So, what I've been reading in this book is how language, in Fairclough's point of view, shapes, maintains, or challenges power. And this goes across the studies of many people that have followed critical discourse analysis and have built models of critical discourse analysis. Everybody refers back to Fairclough, so that's why I decided to read this book. Some of the concepts that are interesting to learn here is that language is seen as social practice. Critical discourse analysis is seen as a three-dimensional model that looks at the text and then the discourse in practice and discourse as social practice. So a description or a linguistic analysis of a text and then the discursive practice of looking at it, like critiquing the language. How is it used? How is it produced? How is it consumed? So that would be a critical view of the language to then explain language as social practice, and how that fits in the context. So important within these concepts is the part of power, how Fairclough sees power in the discourse, in what we say, and behind the discourse, in the conditions that the powerful people or the people in power produce so that a certain discourse prevails over others. So the purpose of critical discourse analysis, as seen by Fairclough, is awareness of how language works so that we can resist, change, or challenge the power dynamics. I think all of this is fascinating, and all of this has me stop and think about different aspects of methodology in research, and the concepts will be important, but thinking about this question, the first question that we were giving in this task, is related to methods, methodologies, design. Well, this book is not per se, it doesn't have like recipes on how to conduct discourse analysis. It is more complex than that from what I have seen. But there are clear indications of what good critical discourse analysis is. So, and I think the most relevant one for me is the positionality of the researchers, because what Fairclough says is we're not going to be neutral when interpreting a text, but the interpretation is necessary. So he sees critical discourse analysis as a form of discourse as well. And the researcher is the person carrying this burden, let's call it. So the interpretation, therefore, will be in the discourse and behind the discourse. And this gets me thinking about theming. So I'm going to have to be very careful about theming around ideologies. So I'm guessing I might start coding, looking at short messages and doing this linguistic analysis, why things are said in the way they are said, and then taking that into themes that really reflect ideologies of the participants in my study. I'm going to be analyzing the use of English and the teaching of English in Mexico. So it's people talking about language. So there are many dimensions of language that I'm going to be referring to in my study. So that complicates things, but also makes them fun and makes Fairclough very relevant for what I'm trying to do. So that's mainly what it's emerging. So the methodology has to be has to make sense and connect with the purpose of critical discourse analysis. So if I'm going to really conduct this discourse analysis or critical discourse analysis, I need to be very reflective, and I need to include my participants in the creation of this social message. So the dialectics of the study are going to be very interesting, and probably difficult. Now, the next question that we had was about the dimensions of qualitative inquiry. And this is also interesting, because for Fairclough, reality is socially constructed through language. So that ontological perspective is going to be important, and is really logical to see in critical discourse analysis, I think, right? But common sense again. So knowledge is ideologically mediated. That's the theory of critical discourse analysis. So there are powerful ideologies behind the discourse, and this is the epistemological dimension of qualitative inquiry that I need to take into account as I'm conducting my study. So in the ideological dimension, I will consider neoliberalism, linguistic imperialism, and globalization ideologies. So and even if Fairclough doesn't refer to linguistic imperialism, he does talk about language and the global order. So that part I need to explore in depth, so that this dimension of ideology is supported by the type of analysis I will conduct. Then the part that I already mentioned, if we want to consider a reflexive dimension of qualitative inquiry, is my positionality, the common sense assumptions that I'm going to have, that my participants are going to have, that might be limited to the context, which is going to be very specific: Mexico City, English language professionals in different capacities, etc. So what assumptions we share as a group of English language teaching professionals from Mexico working with non-native speakers. So that's going to be interesting to analyze and reflect upon in the analysis that's going to be presented to American people that might not be familiar with this common sense realities that we might share during the study. So so those are a few of the dimensions that are emerging from reading Fairclough. And lastly, but not least important, was the question of more questions about that are emerging. So I need to decide very quickly, because there is theory that I think is important, and that it's a little bit dense in the text. So Fairclough talks about critique being normative or explanatory. So normative, confined to the context and analyzed within the context where it is created, that I think is very valid. And explanatory, which is looking at everything extra in the context. So is my context global, or is my context Mexico City? How global is the view of the study that I will conduct? Where do I stop? Or if I'm going to make it like too superficial by going too big when considering context, which is another one of the things that emerge from reading Fairclough. Where does context stop? And then so the dialectics, because what Fairclough says, okay, the normative and exploratory have to talk to each other so that you get a big picture that proposes strong dialectics. I need to work that out. I think as I am saying this, I just don't see the picture. It's still too abstract in my mind. So I need to like bring it down to earth. And another question, which probably I should have, is about discursive action. So how will discursive action be reflected in the analysis of my data? I'm not very sure. I need to explore more. I need to go deeper into the book and into other materials. I'm rereading other support material, especially Paul G, because I think he's a much better communicator than many other theorists, and is easier to read. So this is going to supplement the way that I'm seeing this. So I hope I wasn't too obnoxious and this is not too long. But thank you very much for listening, if you did. And apologies for submitting this so very late. But bye-bye.